Hi everyone, this is John Egan from BIM Launcher. I was recently asked to give a talk at Enterprise Ireland offices to a group of visiting PhD students from ETH Zurich in Switzerland. The following video has been post-edited to join the sound recording from the event with the slides. I hope you enjoy the video and I look forward to hearing your comments. Today I'm going to talk to you about distributed common data environments. So largely what that's going to be about is common data environments and the problems that we have today and how we are going to work toward the solution for connected common data environments in the future. So my background is I started actually labouring on construction sites for 5 years before I studied or started to become, or my training to become a very bad architect. So this is an actual model from first year in university. I realised quickly when I was in architecture that I couldn't draw, so I turned very quickly to generative design and BIM as an attempt to represent what was in my mind. And I got really into the computational design side of things. So this is actually on one of my summer internships with an engineering company in the UK. I actually designed the generative model for the Doha Green Line in Qatar. So I was actually doing very poorly in architecture, but I was actually doing real stuff in the real world on the other side of things. So with my confidence high, I left that engineering consultancy and I started up my own BIM consultancy, where I started to lead or do lots of R&D type projects for different construction companies. And we had the fortunate encounter of a company that needed a project management solution for their requirements. They needed a very simple solution because it was just for the purpose of ticking that level 2 BIM box in the UK, which was enforced for publicly procured projects in 2016. So,
John, sorry, did you set your company up in Ireland or in the UK?
In the UK.
Okay.
Yeah. So we decided to go into a joint venture, and they said, look, we'll pay you for 18 months to go off and research how to build this thing and we can sell it to the industry. So I said, okay, let's do that. After 18 months, they realized that it was unlikely that me and my business partner, who had just recently graduated, could actually support a company of 16,000 people with a new software solution. So they relinquished us of our duties, and we went and started my first startup, which was called Jenka. And the whole premise of Jenka was that you could really simply deploy your project management solutions, like a Wix or a Squarespace for your own project management solution, onto your projects. And the way that we did this was through using advanced web services and cloud technologies. So we pretty much provided those as a service, and the construction companies would then, they were supposed to then pick them up, build a nice UI on top of them, and start using them on projects. But as we know, there's not that many people in our industry that actually are familiar with web technologies and can do that process. So that ceased to exist. And then we started, I persevered, started BIM Launcher. So today we are a startup, we're 4 people, we're located in the west of Ireland in Galway, and our mission is to revolutionize project productivity through connecting a previously disconnected set of project management platforms. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. So why we exist? So I think Brian Tighe actually summarizes it pretty well here when he says that vendors are unwilling to build integrations between the tools, and especially the project management solutions that are used by the owners, designers, and contracts and projects. And it costs a lot of money to create these integrations. So as construction is a project-based industry, these integrations could cost 20, 30,000, maybe more to build between applications just for a project. It's a lot to absorb for the project finance team, I suppose. So the workaround is that they manage the task of data transfer between these platforms manually. And obviously the knock-on is that you're losing lots of data, etc., and you've no single source of truth. I actually talked about the golden thread earlier. But the reality is that this ecosystem is growing at a rate. There's new startups coming up, being introduced to the industry every day, new point solutions. McKinsey had it last year that there was 2,400 technology solutions available across the construction life cycle, and they're all in data silos. So it's very important that we actually tackle the issues to exchange this information seamlessly between these platforms as the ecosystem grows. So Archie talked a bit about it, but I just wanted to touch on what a common data environment is. And essentially I suppose a common data environment, according to BS 1192 and the ISO 19650, its core purpose is to manage project process and information across the whole life cycle of the building. And that was kind of reduced from a couple of lines to that. So like the characteristics and features include is that it's accessible to the project team via the internet. It's a shared data environment, so there's multiple systems, multiple users, multiple projects on these systems. It supports document and model-based workflows between different stakeholders, and it's supposed to be that single source of truth for a project. So that goes for everything is for your communications, tasks, project status, and in the event that there's any issues, legal. But the issue is that it's not a single system here, as Autodesk and Oracle would say, or would promote themselves with a true CDE, and there's not a single system. And I think like the main reason it can't be a single system is that there's so many different specialisms requiring so many specific features from each individual tool that's been used on the project. So what I think, what we have on the left here is an image that I took from a box, a report by Box. I think it's actually a really interesting report to read. If you
Box is like a Dropbox service, just for
yeah, it's a Dropbox competitor, right? So they actually analysed a project over its life cycle, and what this graph actually shows is the patterns of information exchange. So each purple company represents an individual here, a cluster represents an organisation, and those red lines represent the exchange of information between the different parties. So it's quite chaotic, and one thing that I found was really interesting when I was reading this report is that construction actually exchanges twice the amount of information between different organizations than any other industry, and that's finance, banking, music, media, whatever it is. I thought that was really interesting. So if I...
John, that's because it's a much more complex...
Well, this is your complexity visualized.
Sorry,
yeah.
I mean to cut across, but you can see what I put there.
Yeah.
That would validate.
Yeah. So
that was also one reason that we are actually giving the same information multiple times.
Yes.
Because this is real time.
yeah.
This wise man there in front mentioned something that maybe other people need other information, or some wise man presented it today.
Well, maybe we come to it.
Yeah.
Let's show you what it does.
So, like, what I have here is, I suppose, a cartoon representation of, or an abstraction of this pattern into a much more simplistic pattern. The kind of information exchange that's being exchanged between these systems, including, files, documents that are like submittals, ORFIs, issues, whatever it may be. And then you've your models, which is your BIM models, and information that's in, within your 2D CAD or whatever it may be. So you've all these different stakeholders, and in terms of a workflow here, you have a requirement to exchange this information maybe between BIM 360 and Aconex. So let's say, for instance, Aconex is used as the single, I suppose, the client-led system here. when the site teams open up their Procore environment, which is a lot more rich field tools built into Procore, and I suppose a platform that's actually built for a construction site, that environment is empty. So you have all your design information that's being exchanged through the first, say, quarter of the project, but when it needs to be moved to that construction phase of the life cycle, all of that information must be moved manually from Aconex to Procore, and typically that's done by a document controller, and yeah. So the problem here is that there's no existing standard to connect these different systems. So, you know, this comes back to that fact that there's no alignment between the vendor interfaces for exchanging documents and models through these systems. And that isn't really because, that's not anyone's fault. That's because vendors have been building these systems over the last 20 years, and it's a bit like a mechanic starting at the engine thinking, no one's ever going to look in the engine, let's just make it push out as much horsepower as we can. And then all of a sudden, 20 years later, we need to have these engines being transposed between different cars. So he's like, okay, now we need to get the engine's drivetrain fitted to every car. So it's kind of like, maybe I've gone through too deep into the analogy there, but pretty much what the issues are is that you've no common object model. So an issue or a document in BIM 360 is not the same as an issue or a document in Procore or Aconex. So when I said the same, I mean they're not represented in the same data structure, and that means that, you know, for instance, if we talk about a document in Aconex documents have 25 pieces of metadata on a typical document. In Procore, you have 2. You know, you have your name and your description. So when you're moving your documents from Aconex into Procore, you're needing to map or get rid of this valuable metadata. So that just highlights, I suppose, one of the challenges when you're moving these different entities between systems. The next issue is that there's no common query language. So when you're talking to each of these systems, it's not like when you're, you know, you can't just send the same command to search all documents from Procore, BIM 360, etc. It just doesn't. So they have their own internal queries and their own data structures that's behind the hood. Every project is configured differently. So, for instance, when you're talking about, you know, for instance, what I mean configured differently is the schemas for each entity within each of these systems are flexible. So, for instance, in Aconex, you as the project information manager ahead of the actual project commencement, you're given the flexibility to design or define custom metadata fields on a given document. That means that it's even more difficult to create a single tool that can sit right in the middle there that can be reused on every project. So you need to recreate that tool pretty much every time, or create some magical system that does it for you. Then the question is, what's the project system of record? Is it a client system? Is it a contractor system? Does that apply for all of the different entities, or is it just, you know, these are the kind of questions that you have to ask yourself. So, like, who owns the data in the different systems and the IP on the information? Is it a straightforward thing to, you know, share, like, for instance, an issue between the client and contractor? Can the tier 1 contractors see that as well? And obviously, access rights then, like, when sensitive, it's a bit of a duplicate point. So the issue for clients, contractors, is that there's, you know, you've this inefficient process. So when you have to do this manual process of information exchange from Aconex into Procore, for example, you have a poor document controller, or a lot of tasks belong to different stakeholders that are actually responsible for doing this exchange of information. And once again, if we bring it back to the quality assurance side of things, again, you have to have all this information brought across and checked. And more often than not, what you'll find is that you'll have missing versions of files, you'll have broken files, or you'll have metadata missing because it's not compatible with that system. That fundamentally breaks the potential for that golden thread of information through as this information flows through the various different stages of the workflow. So why integrate? And this comes back to the benefit. Well, it's the benefits essentially of integrating. So to my mind, successful projects are connected projects. You get faster processes and cycle times. You've seamless transfer and flow of information with no loss of metadata. You've the right and most information in all of your systems when you need it, so you can trust in your project information. You obviously have no double handling of information, so you're removing that document controller from their initial laborious tasks, which could result in happier staff as well. And then you've consistent projects, so you can use this across all of your projects, and you can have that, I suppose, that spread of value shared between all of the project workflows, for instance. And I found this image yesterday on Twitter. So it's from the Bartlett School of Architecture. It was from a robotic building. It was I think it was the front of a book that they have coming out. But I thought it was really nice just to illustrate these frames as the APIs that are exposed belong to these project management solutions. And then you have these cords that attach them, and that's really, for me, it's the visual metaphor for connecting this metadata and the different types of entities that can be exchanged between these systems. So, who's working on this problem today? We have groups like CEN and ISO who are actually working on it, and they've come up with something called the DIN spec. So that DIN spec is a prerequisite standard, so it's likely that it will be a standard at a point in the future. And this essentially is a standard that describes I suppose the high-level requirements for exchanging information, as I've described in the benefits slide before this, between the different project management solutions. But having studied that, it's not enough. It's like you still have a lot of the problems that you, like for instance the project schemas changing, the mapping interfaces between the systems. It doesn't describe the technical implementation, nor does it provide the tooling to actually enable the exchange. So we are working with the Build and Smart openCDE-API along with these companies to help define, I suppose, and implement a standard for exchanging this information between the systems. I've actually written about it on the Bin Launcher blog. If any of you want to check it out, it's called openCDE-API, the open interface to rule them all. So it's just some of my thoughts on I suppose the current status of this issue. So how do we deliver a distributed CDE? What does it require if those standards don't meet the requirements of the industry today? What are the kind of things that we need to be thinking about? And what we need is a distributed technology stack that can codify the information management between respective systems. So that would mean that, for instance, you would need a common object model, so a single object model that we can map different entities from different systems to, and then obviously have some event-driven API off the back of that can update and create and delete or whatever it needs to do of that entity in the supported systems. You need collaborative roles. So what's needed here is like your authorization. So each user needs to, I suppose, be put into a role, and information needs to be secured in a way through this platform. So it needs to be obviously sort of like embody the governance of the project that would typically be done by a single project management solution. And then obviously these projects are continuously changing, and that's why we need it to be dynamic and adaptive, because it's obviously changing through the project life cycle as well. So it's a complex topic. so typically I will put my logo, company logo here, because this is everything I've talked about is what we do, but essentially I think it can be summed up by that mapping representation and obviously the systems that we support around that. So thanks for listening.